Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the story of how photography came to be. And here's the thing, it's not a tale about one single flash of genius. Nope, it's about two ancient secrets that were basically just waiting around to meet each other.
See, the invention of photography wasn't some big spark. It was more like two puzzle pieces finally clicking together. On one side, you had the optical secret, that's the physics part. And on the other, you had the chemical secret, a substance that could basically remember what the light was showing it. So here's our game plan. We're going to walk through 6 key chapters. From those ancient ideas and the first attempts to capture a ghostly image, all the way to the insane camera that's probably sitting in your pocket right now.
Okay, let's jump in with that first piece of the puzzle, the optical secret. This is so fundamental. It's the principle behind every camera that has ever existed, whether it's an old wooden box or the latest smartphone.
It's all about this effect called the Camera Obscura, which literally just means dark room. And people have known about this forever, since classical times. It's just a basic property of physics, right? Light travels in straight lines. So if you poke a tiny hole in a dark box, the light from the outside projects a perfect, though weirdly upside-down image on the inside wall. That's it. That's the basis for every camera.
But what's really wild is the timeline here. I mean, look at this massive gap. The optical part, the Camera Obscura, was known and being used way back in the 9th century. But it took almost 1,000 years for someone to figure out the chemical part and finally put the two together. 1,000 years!
All right, so people knew how to project an image. The next huge problem was, how do you get that fleeting, ghostly picture to stick around? It wasn't about seeing the image, it was about making it stay.
So you get these first major steps, but it was literally like trying to capture a ghost. Back in 1802, guys like Thomas Wedgwood were putting leaves on paper coated with silver nitrate. And yeah, it created a silhouette, a negative, but the second you took it into the light to look at it, poof. The whole thing just kept getting darker and darker until the image was totally gone.
It was this guy, Joseph Niepce, who finally cracked the code in 1827 and made an image permanent. But his method was, well, it was unbelievably slow. The very first photograph that still exists today took around 8 hours to expose. 8 hours! Can you imagine having to stay perfectly still for that long?
So Niepce proved it could be done, even if it wasn't practical. And that single success kicked off an absolute race to make photography faster and better, which led to 2 major competing methods that really defined the early days of this new art form.
And this created 2 different camps. Over in France, you had Louis Daguerre making these incredibly detailed, absolutely beautiful images on silver plates. But they were one of a kind. You only got one. Meanwhile, in England, you had William Talbot, whose process created a paper negative. Now, Daguerre's pictures were way sharper, but Talbot's idea, the negative to positive process, that meant you could make unlimited copies. And that, right there, was the real game changer.
Okay, so the concept of making copies is proven. The next chapter? It was all about making the whole thing faster, cheaper, and way, way easier. The race was on.
And the pace of innovation just exploded. I mean, look at this. The time it took to take a picture goes from hours in 1827 down to 30 minutes just a decade later. Then another 12 years and we're at 10 seconds. And by 1871, it's down to a single second. That is just a staggering leap in technology in such a short time.
Now, getting that 10-second exposure was revolutionary, but it came with a huge catch. This new wet collodion process meant the glass plate you were taking the picture on had to be prepped, exposed, and developed all while it was still wet. So photographers had to drag around what was basically a portable darkroom tent filled with all these messy, pretty dangerous chemicals. It was fast, sure, but user-friendly? Not a chance.
So, this brings us to a really crucial question. How did this super complex, messy, expert-level science finally break out of the lab and get into the hands of, normal, everyday people?
Well, the answer really came from one guy, George Eastman. And his stroke of genius was the Kodak camera. He got rid of the heavy, breakable glass plates and replaced them with a flexible roll of film. Suddenly, the camera itself could be small, light, and dead simple to use.
And his whole philosophy summed up in this incredible slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest," just changed everything. You take your 100 pictures, mail the entire camera back to his factory, and they would develop the film, make your prints, and send it all back to you with a fresh roll of film already loaded. It completely transformed photography from this complicated craft into a hobby for everyone.
And just as photography was getting easier for everybody, the next big leap happened. Color. The world didn't have to be just black and white anymore. In 1907, the Lumiere brothers introduced something called the autochrome process, and it was the first commercially successful way to capture the world in all its real, living color.
And this brings us to our final, and maybe the most important part of the story. Okay, so we figured out how to permanently capture light. Why does that matter? How did that one ability really change the world?
Well, the short answer is, it changed pretty much everything. Seriously, it totally reshaped almost every part of human life. It showed us scientific wonders, from galaxies millions of light years away to tiny cells. It became a tool for social reform, exposing things like child labor. It brought the brutal reality of war home to the public for the first time. It even changed art. It freed painters from having to be realistic so they could explore abstraction. And maybe most importantly for all of us, it changed memory. It let every single family create a visual history of their own lives.
You know, when you look back at it all, the story of photography shows us something really profound. Its invention wasn't just a lucky accident. It feels inevitable. It was just a logical result of combining two basic principles of our universe, physics and chemistry, that were always there, just waiting for us to finally put them together.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on, doesn't it? If photography was just an inevitable invention waiting to happen, what modern marvels, what unbelievable new technologies are sitting out there right now, just waiting for two known ideas to finally click together?